Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. Engagers, today we have an expert in something that is, besides gamification, a bit different. But before we get started with that, Danny, we need to know, are you prepared to engage?
Absolutely.
Let's do this, because Danny Stefanic is the brains behind the world's first WebXR, so mixed reality. Am I right with that one?
Well, there's a lot of terms floating around. We can sort of chat about them as we go.
So it's the first WebXR learning experience platform called LearnBrite. He's also the founder of the 3D internet company ExitReality Inc., the founder of the International Virtual Reality Association, and the chairman of the virtual world's social network, Koinup. He was called a visionary by his peers and deemed by the Wall Street's CIOs and Silicon Valley's VCs to be one of the pioneers in this field, and he has been creating groundbreaking 3D businesses for over, wait for it, 25 years. Isn't that amazing? Danny works with young businesses to share his experiences and give back to the community as well. He has assisted companies with angel investment, international licensing, acquisitions, exits, managing distributed teams, and has personally closed IP acquisitions valued at $85 million. So that's fantastic, Danny. But I did have a curiosity before we get into that, because I know AR very well, augmented reality, VR, virtual reality. What do you mean by XR?
Well, XR is actually the culmination of VR and AR. In fact, the whole thing is a spectrum. And I very quickly, I just have a philosophy about this, which is, for me, it's all 3D. And 3D is just a media type alongside video, images, text, and audio. And 3D can be applied and consumed or experienced in many different ways, whether it's in the real world, augmented, or in a completely virtual world created and shut off from reality. And there's this spectrum in between where you can mix the two. So XR covers the whole spectrum of AR to VR.
So it was kind of in the field I was expecting it, but I wanted to make sure we were talking about the same terms. Because Danny, we also want to know, what does being Danny in a day like nowadays? Because we spoke the other day, we were talking about your platform, and I know that forms an important part of your days, talking to people like myself who were interested in seeing what was behind LearnBrite and doing demos and so on. But I want to know, what does, maybe, I'm not sure if calling it a regular day, but like, what does being Danny Stefanic in a day like today or any other day look like?
Well, that's a very good question, and it changes, but I try to get some habits in place. And for life for me over the last decade, I'd say, has changed pretty dramatically. I used to work in an office in Melbourne, Australia, a warehouse actually, where we used to have staff coming in every day, and I was the first to arrive for morale and the last to leave at night. And it was pretty tiring, and a lot of times I felt I was just there to be present. And over the years, I've transitioned more and more to remote work and remote teams. And in fact, now most of our businesses run entirely remotely. I have resources all over Europe and America, and it works really, really well. So one of the key and fun things that I have in a regular day is actually we have stand-up meetings in virtual reality. So because we don't have physical offices, we do meet occasionally, at our serviced offices here and there, or at co-working spaces. But for our daily stand-up meetings, we have them in VR, and we have a 3D office or headquarters where we keep all our documents, our experiments. So we all jump in there, and everything's there just like the way it was the day before. And we've been doing that for a year and a half now. It's actually pretty incredible. It's kind of something I dreamt about 20, 30 years ago, getting into VR. And, now it's something that I do every single day. So that's probably the key thing I'd want to share about my regular day.
So besides being in that virtual office, where are you, at least like today? Where could we find you in the real world nowadays?
Well, right now you're talking to me in Spain, but my home is in Melbourne, Australia. We're headquartered out of Phoenix in the US, but probably 50-50 between the States and Europe, based on clients and various businesses that I'm involved in.
That's great. That's great. And from your intro, before we get into the questions, I just have, again, I'm very curious about many things. And one of the things when you were mentioning you guys meet in a virtual office, what would you say are like, in a few seconds, key benefits of having a virtual office versus, I don't know, speaking over Skype or Google Hangouts or whatever tool you'd like to use?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, we use Slack. We used Slack prior to doing our virtual meetings online, and it's nice asynchronous messaging. You get to leave things for people to read. Occasionally, you get together and you're having real-time messaging, and that's kind of useful. But as a remote team, you start to get a bit disconnected, and you're losing a sense of culture. I mean, you've got your emojis and sharing animated GIFs and YouTube videos and those sorts of things in those channels, and that's fun, but it doesn't engage everyone. And you also miss the speed of communication that you get when you're sitting next to someone and working on a problem together or working on an idea. And so we use Slack all the time, and we started to use our own platform for virtual meetings. And then we decided, well, this is a bit of a waste. Let's just merge the two together. So we created an add-on for Slack called Mootup, which just turns every channel in the Slack into a room, and each person has their own private office. So we're casually during the day just spinning up virtual meetings in our office spaces or our shared co-working spaces in Slack using Mootup. And the real benefit is presence. You're there with other people, you feel present, you have a sense of togetherness that you don't get with this abstract messaging platforms. And the other main benefit is the persistence of information, having all your stuff around you. I mean, searching for a document can kind of be tricky, but if I ask you which drawer are your black socks in, you'll automatically have a visual cue to where it is. And the same happens with the 3D office spaces, the co-working spaces. We have our content around, you know exactly where something is. Oh, there's that document for our priority roadmap. We'll bring that up. It's just over there. Or people drop videos and pin them onto the walls. We have these just incredible collection of curious stuff within, and it makes a space a home. It makes something that is the culture of your business that I think is missing with all of these other tools. There's just a lack of homeliness or customization that makes it your team's space. If that makes sense.
It does. It absolutely does. And I love it. I have to say it. But now we would like to shift a little bit, Danny, because we would like to know of a time when you had what we like to call a fail moment or a first attempt in learning moment. And of course, we want to be there with you, see what happened, tell us that story. And of course, we also want to see what you learned from that, or how you got out of that, such a failure moment. In general, what would you maybe do different if you were facing exactly the same situation? So take us there with you and let's live it together.
Yeah, that's a tricky question. I had a mentoring group ask me that same question not too long ago, and I was kind of stumped, and because I didn't have an answer for them immediately. And I remember what one of my advisors said. He says that I fail so quickly that you may not even notice it. That he was saying that I am very adaptive and look for new ways to pivot or change or turn something into an opportunity. So these days I tend to fail very, very fast. But I've got an interesting story because it was a huge investment in my life, which didn't turn out the way I was hoping. So I've always had an interest in virtual reality, and I've always had this vision of turning the entire internet into a virtual metaverse that you can explore and cohabit. And in 2000, after the internet bubble burst, I just exited a 3D shopping company that I founded. And I had time and money on my hands, and I started working on this 3D internet. It was called ExitReality, actually. And we ended up building it. It took 8 years to launch. 2008, we launched this add-on for browsers that can convert every web page into a architectural space that's unique, and you can navigate around it, meet people that happen to be in the same web page as you, and travel through links as doorways. Incredible technology, fantastic, absolutely amazing. And have great clients like Warner Brothers and others, Carl's Jr., a burger chain in the US, as clients doing advertising in the platform. But then the innovation spend kind of drew up when the global financial crisis hit, and it turned out that The platform we built was technically brilliant, and it was great from a technology standpoint, but it was relying on innovation spend. And when we got people into the environment, they were really asking the same question all the time: what am I meant to do? What's it for? And, well, you can look around. And this is actually something that, it's like being in a town with no people, because the internet was so big. So people were spread out all over the place, having lonely journeys looking at content. And the real aspect of it that's important is the social aspect. That's what really gets people going. And you need a critical mass of people before that happens. So you need to be something that has millions and millions of users from, very early on to make that worthwhile. So the real failure here was that we didn't anticipate and didn't learn about how people needed to be given challenges and to be led through learning challenges from a base and continually. So this is actually something that informed things that I did later on. So we acquired virtual worlds. There was VSide and Twinity, which is kind of a mashup between Google Earth and Second Life. And, in these games, we have a lot more leveling up. We have people doing challenges, and there's lots of barriers to becoming, having more access to more features or access to more content. And these barriers can only be achieved through actions in the game, so gamification. And that's what was missing was from this ExitReality platform. Incredible technology, incredible platform, but it didn't have the incentives for users. And so that having created the 3D internet, it was a failure because it didn't gamify the experience for the participants.
So the key learning here would be actually to think about the motivations of people, I would say. That would be in there. And some of the motivations were precisely those challenges. You also mentioned that people felt lonely. So that social interaction as well. So I think there's many key learnings there that we could take. We could sit down and talk about each one of them. But Danny, let's shift. Let's go into another story in which you might want to tell us about a big challenge that you faced or something that you were interested in creating or doing, and you actually went and did your thing, and using, again, gamification, game design strategies, and so on, you actually had a massive success. Which I'm sure you have many of these stories, but tell us one of them, and what would you maybe attribute most of the success to? What are some of the key features or things that you would attribute that success to?
I'm trying to think what I'd term as a massive success. But the idea of using different thinking to solve problems is something that I'm very, very interested in. And I started reading, when I was relatively young, books by Edward de Bono. Have you heard of him? He defined the term lateral thinking, for example.
I have heard of lateral thinking, but I not too much, so I probably am quite a bit ignorant in the whole topic.
Well, Edward de Bono's books are very interesting, and has one where you put on different hats to play different roles, to look at things from different angles. But his whole concept is ideas of how to look at problems differently and create solutions. For instance, I remember a story about him where he has an office on the top floor of a building, and people used to complain that the elevator was too slow. So he pondered a solution, and people stopped complaining. And his solution was putting mirrors in the elevator. So the elevator didn't become faster. People just became less conscious of the time it took because they were busy looking at themselves. And that's kind of a lateral solution. So I remember actually coming up with the name for the business, ExitReality. And that came from one of those techniques, which is to think the opposite of what everyone else is doing. Everyone was talking about ways to get into virtual reality or into 3D or immersing yourself. And you turn it on its head, and ExitReality becomes the same thing, but from a different perspective. And that's one of the ways to use creative thinking. And one of the other techniques I use a lot is random word association. You can pick just any old random word and then try and get from it to the problem you're trying to solve. So you could just pick a word like monkey, right? And that may have nothing to do with the artificial intelligence solution you're trying to solve or the learning problem you're trying to solve, but you try and work your mind from these random words to your solution. And it forces you to go down different pathways in your mind that you wouldn't normally access. And creative thinking just comes out of that automatically. I know this isn't answering your question directly about the biggest massive challenge, but it's something that I'm super, super interested in, and it's something that Edward Bono said that everyone's a creative thinker, they just don't know how. And the methods you can employ, you can become as creative as you like. You end up with limitless ideas. So I guess solving the business name for ExitReality. You must, you probably run into this. Everyone does. I'm going to build a new business, or I'm going to do something, and you sit down to figure out the name for it, and it takes an incredibly long amount of time.
More than it probably should. We should be probably thinking about the users. We should be thinking about many of the product itself, many other things, and we spend a disproportionate amount of time thinking about names, for sure.
Absolutely. Especially when you're filling out forms, they ask you for a username or the title you want to use, and you slow down and you go, I should think about this because it's important.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense, because I think it taps into the importance of thinking about things through a different lens. And one of the lenses that we propose here is thinking about things through the lens of games. And that's a way to solve educational situations, marketing situations, learning situations for companies. There's many, many situations that you can see through different lens, and these lenses can be games or lateral thinking. And there's many techniques, as you were mentioning, that could be used for this kind of solving problems. Because in the end, well, I'm an engineer, and probably that's part of my my training as I studied, but solving problems is something that I think we do almost every day, and we're working our ways around it all the time. And there's, again, many ways to approach it, and that's a great one for sure.
Agreed.
The other thing that we would like to know, Danny, is if when you face one of these challenges, one of these situations, or you have a client that wants to solve a problem, and you use either, again, your platform, your WebXR platform, or any of the things that you've been using in the past, I'm assuming you have some sort of process or a thought process, or somehow some way in which you approach these problems, and maybe a series of steps or general ideas you go through. Can you walk us very quickly through what that process would look like for the solving of any of the problems that you face?
Well, yeah, it depends which problem we're talking about. Often challenged with clients coming to us wanting to do something, and they may have already decided on a technology or a way to do something, but it's before they've considered necessarily the learning outcomes they're looking for. And occasionally it comes to be that I recommend that people don't use VR or 3D or WebXR or user-centered scenarios for their solutions, because it's not going to meet the learning objectives they're really trying to get to. So a lot of people do jump the gun a bit and get entrenched in something new or shiny, and just want to go down that path. So specifically when we're building experiences or scenarios, and this is reflected in our platform as well, the LearnBrite platform, is that we try and make them platform agnostic in that you don't care about what device somebody's going to be experiencing the scenario in. And this also goes a bit to my philosophy on what is called VR, being VR ready versus VR only. I'll just give a little bit of background on this because I think it'll be helpful to listeners. Most of the learning objectives that you can think of can be experienced on a flat screen and in VR, but they can be on a laptop, on a tablet, or a mobile phone. Let's say it's improving your sales skills, or doing some safety training, looking around the environment, identifying risks. You don't necessarily need a VR headset for that. But it does, VR headsets increase immersion, engagement, and therefore you get better knowledge retention. But just the fact of having a user-centered scenario, something where the user is at the big center of the experience, they're making decisions, choices that impact the outcome, is the real shift in learning. Instead of having lean-back learning where you're just watching a video or clicking next on a slideshow and then choosing the least wrong answer from multiple choice, a lean-forward learning is where the user's making decisions and changing the outcome, impacting the experience, and allowing the user to fail in a safe environment. And these things are really important. But most of the companies we're seeing in VR training at the moment are on the VR only side. You have to buy a VR headset, you have to put this on, and that's the way you're going to experience it. And we're focused on, when we design something, look at, how can this be experienced on mobile, tablet, VR, And we've built the platform so that the author doesn't need to think about that. The platform does it all for them. So you can really focus on the learning objectives. And that's pretty unique for us, but it's something that I think the industry needed, is an on-ramp from where instructional designers are today all the way to VR and AR, instead of this huge chasm that's been put between where you need to get Unity programmers and 3D modelers and everyone else involved before you can even get a basic platform and before you start considering learning objectives. So starting with learning objectives and trying to create user-centered experiences is something that I really push and encourage people to explore as well. It's something we lost with the death of Flash and interactivity over the years. And we kind of, I feel, stepped back into the dark ages a bit with slideshows.
Actually, what you're saying, I completely agree that there's many people trying to jump the bandwagon first and go ahead and say, well, I saw the other day somebody who had this racing game. It's like, yeah, but that was for a sales team, which maybe it makes sense for that sales team. But what you're looking for is, I don't know, for your people who are in a support line, for people who are thinking of committing suicide. Do you think they are the same profile of people? Some of them are salespeople, and these are people who are giving psychological support to people over the phones. It's like, well, yeah, but it was very exciting, how these cars and racing. And it's like, well, that kind of thing, I'm sure you face it more often than you'd like to. And of course, you help them go through that process. But another thing that you were mentioning that I found very, very interesting as well is this whole thing about the Flash environment and people needing to go through technology before thinking of the learning objectives. And I think having a platform like what you mentioned about your platform, demystifying, so to speak, the difficulty of all this and approaching it to people, it can be very, very useful. But even, and this would be my calling, so to speak, even if you don't have that figured out, even if you're not going to work with Danny and LearnBrite that are simplifying this part of the process, I always invite people who are thinking of creating any learning solution. The first thing that you have to think about is, what is your objective? And in the case of learning, it's usually, what is your learning objective? And then if you're going to use a specific tool, like this platform like LearnBrite, why do you want to use that and not a slideshow? Like, what are you trying to achieve? I'm not saying it's not better, because of course it is better. But what I mean is, if you don't understand what you're trying to achieve, it's hard to achieve it, let alone measure it. But again, it was just a reflection point which I arrived to listening to you, and I thought it was very, very interesting, all that you were diving into.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one thing, it does irritate me when I see games used just for games. So in learning environments where I'm going to learn a bit of content, and then I'm going to play a game that's a puzzle or a bit of racing. And then once I've done that, I can then go to the next piece of content. And effectively, they're just games in between content that have no direct correlation except to create a gap between the pieces of content. That really irritates me, because it's not matching the learning objectives. And when you said about other tools, of course you can build user-centered experiences in slideshows too. If you can do basic branching and allow a user to make choices and follow different outcomes, then you've created a user-centered scenario. Just two choices. This path is failure, this path is success. If they fail, let them loop back into making another choice again. That's enough to start people getting control of the experience. So it's not difficult. And furthermore, we've got younger audiences which demand this. They are used to all the fantastic $1 million experiences on all the platforms online. If you give them a linear experience, they're just going to switch off and not pay attention. As soon as you engage them and make choices, you've got them back in the engagement seat. So it doesn't need to be VR or complex or anything like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, engagers, this is a quick break because, as some of you might already know, Professor Game has partnered with Gamification Europe as media sponsors once again for 2019's conference in Berlin. We have also managed to secure a 10% discount for the engagers to attend to the conference. To collect your discounted tickets, all you have to do is go to professorgame.com/gamificationeurope. If you do, you are not only getting a special offer, you're also supporting Professor Game through this affiliate link. As you know, Gamification Europe is a growing conference in its third edition, and quite an exciting as well as a unique opportunity to get to meet top experts in gamification from all around Europe and the world. So you can get to meet many of the speakers and the people who have been interviewed in Professor Game Podcast. And if you haven't already, I'd also love the chance to get to meet you in person because, of course, I will be there. If this also sounds engaging for you, then just click pause, go to professorgame.com/gamificationeurope and get your discounted tickets. So, Danny, what would you say is something that maybe we would coin as a best practice or something that any gamification-inspired or game design-inspired project could benefit from? So to speak, again, maybe a best practice or an element or something that you would say, like, use this or think about this when you're creating these projects, and almost any project like that would probably benefit from.
Well, that's a great question because only a week or two ago, I put together the first draft of what I call the VR training canvas. And I posted it on LinkedIn, but I'll give you a link after as well. The VR training canvas is, assuming you've already chosen 3D or user-centered experiences as the way you want to go, the VR training canvas helps you rapidly create a one-page plan of the scope and includes things like what are the stakeholder expectations according to do they want realism or do they want high interaction? Do you need to use 360 videos or can you use 3D models? And that's one way to rapidly get a scope together for a user-centered training experience. So that's something I definitely want to share with people. It is draft number 1, and it's going to be improved over time by other professionals contributing to it. But yeah, the VR training canvas is definitely my go-to, and that's how we scope our projects.
There you go, engagers. You will have it in the show notes. You just go to professorgame.com, type Danny with 2 N's and a Y at the end. You will find the show notes for this episode, and you will be able to click that link directly into the VR canvas. Is that correct?
VR training canvas, yeah. It's kind of based loosely off the idea of the lean business model canvas,
yes,
which is a great concept to study as well. If you haven't heard of it, that's definitely worth considering if you're running a business or even freelancing. But that's the idea too.
If you want to draw some inspiration as well, you might want to look at the gamification model canvas as well. It was created in Spain. We were talking about Spain not long ago.
Yeah, we should definitely link to that in the notes as well.
Beautiful. So the other thing that we would like to know is, after listening to these questions and understanding what this interview goes around, is there anybody that might come to your mind that you would like to listen to in an interview like this one in Professor Game?
Well, I think you've interviewed the people that I already admire. I mean, Carl Kapp is definitely high on my list, and I know you've interviewed him and Ann Copens, and if you...
This can be, the note to Santa Claus. This is exactly like he's actually a very good friend by now. I think it was Bernardo saying that he wanted to listen to Miyamoto from Nintendo. So, I'm not saying we'll have Miyamoto, but you can, if that's what you're a place where you would like to draw inspiration from, let's see if we can get him as well.
I think there's a gentleman that I think would be worth speaking to, is a gentleman named Dan Ariely. And Dan Ariely wrote a fantastic book. It's called Predictably Irrational.
Yeah.
And what I love about that book, and what my wife doesn't like about the book, is that every time I was reading a chapter, hey, did you know this? I've got to tell you about this story, this experiment that they ran, and how we can rely on people doing irrational things predictably. And it's just such an engaging book, but also thinking the ideas behind it and the experiments that they designed. That's someone I would definitely be inspired to listen to.
Absolutely. Dan Ariely from Predictably Irrational. So that's a great book, as you mentioned. And you were talking about books. So is there, aside, of course, from Predictably Irrational, or maybe it is Predictably Irrational, what book would you recommend to the engagers, to the audience, and why?
Well, I would definitely say Predictably Irrational. And I would recommend grabbing any book by Edward de Bono. He recycles quite a lot of the ideas, but I think just picking up any one of them and working through his creative mind flow concepts, how to unlock your creativity, it's really great, because you can just, any moment you think you're stuck somewhere, you can accelerate things, break through, and make decisions really quick. And making quick decisions is kind of important.
Fantastic. That's a great recommendation.
There's also a book that I've heard about but haven't read, or if I have read, it was a long time ago and I've forgotten. It's called Hooked.
Yes, by Nir Eyal.
Yep. So creating incentivized actions. And this is a little bit offbeat, but there's a gentleman I've been listening to various talks from named Alan Watts. He was a speaker of some time ago in the beatnik generation, but he has some great ideas on decision making. And one of my favorite on that is that, to oversimplify it, the idea that decisions are just interplay. So, whenever we're going to make a decision, we spend a lot of time, we ponder this, we ponder that. And the truth is we can keep bringing in new factors forever. And the time when we give up, we say, that's enough, I'm not going to bring any new factors into play, is the time that you make a decision. So one of the things I've been doing more recently in life is actually accelerating that process and going, well, let's not bring any factors in, let's make a decision much more quickly, because understanding that's that moment when you give up is when you actually make a choice. So I would recommend him. He's an entertainer and speaker, so he's kind of amusing to listen to. That's somebody else I would add to the mix for a bit of lateral injection of different perspective.
Fantastic. A couple of great recommendations. Actually, Nir is a past guest as well by now. But we would like to get into a bit more. We've heard your recommendations in other people, but we would like to know, what do you consider is your superpower when getting into gamification and all these worlds as well that you create in WebXR? Or maybe WebXR could be your superpower as well.
I'd say the superpower is thinking platform agnostic. People get stuck in the idea of thinking of apps and building something for one use. We all know that the amount of serious games that are being built and learning content that was built for one single purpose but never to go back on and look at again. And these things gather dust, the branding changes, or the organization's policies changes, and these games just get thrown aside. So they don't last. But the web is flexible and things can be changed and updated, and that's really a great way to build content. And this is really what we're tying 3D to and user-centered experiences. So this idea of building one thing as a product, I think, is a bad way to look at things. Building things as experiences that can be iteratively improved, regardless of which device they're being experienced on, is, I think, the real nice way to think about it. And one of my CTO, actually, he calls it platformy thinking. So are we building it in a platformy way? In other words, is it going to be extensible? Is it going to be reusable? Instead of an app way, which is, let's build it for this one function and done. So yeah, platformy thinking, which I think pervades our group, our team, is probably the superpower.
Fantastic. And let's get a bit deeper into this and ask you, what is your favorite game?
That's a tough one. Because games have inspired me all the way through. I was playing games really early on. I remember saving up for my first Atari and also my Commodore 64 and these sorts of things. So, and even stuff prior to that. Yeah, look, I don't know. The thing that just popped into my head right now was one called Find the Wampus, which is a really simple kind of ASCII-based game. But I can say at the moment I'm playing Assassin's Creed and really loving the juicy graphics and quality on that.
Full of history as well.
Yeah. And that's something that I really appreciate. And also the little bit of in me that would like to see that become actually a virtual world that you can inhabit. I know there's lots of tricks with shaders and things that go on to make that possible the way it is at the moment on flat screens. But to be able to step into those environments in virtual reality is not too far away in the future. And that's pretty tantalizing as an idea.
Absolutely. And in fact, the VR platform of PlayStation 4 is pretty well set up for those kinds of experiences.
Yeah, I think Beat Saber on the PlayStation 4 is my only form of exercise.
That's great. So Danny, we're running out of time, but before you leave, I'd like to know if you have any final piece of advice to leave the engagers with, and then we'll get into the plug zone, of course, and then we'll say it's game over. So take it away.
Yeah, my only advice, actually what I just said about making decisions quicker, failing quicker, and learning from that quicker, and not taking too long. And especially if you're out there in business land or you're thinking about doing something entrepreneurial, take it, do it. You don't want to let life slip away while you're waiting and pondering whether you should do something.
And where can we find you or LearnBrite? I don't know, webpage, social media. Again, Plug Zone. Where can we find more about your work and your company?
Look, I'm living in LinkedIn at the moment, so that's probably the best place to find me and connect with me. I'm there all through the day, so LinkedIn is definitely the best place to connect. And if you want to try out virtual offices, go to mootup.com. That's MOOTUP.com, and LearnBrite. That's LearnBrite with the BRITE.com, and you'll be able to go there and sign up for a 30-day free trial to build multi-user spaces, run conferences, build experiences with bots, just have fun with it. It's all there ready to run with, and you don't need to have programmers involved. If you're an instructional designer, knowledge worker, you can jump in and start creating VR experiences, within the first 30 minutes. So yeah, that's my plugs. But do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with people there, and I share my knowledge freely. If anyone has any questions, they can certainly approach me and ask me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for sharing all of that knowledge today here with the Engagers, for that very kind and generous offer of connecting through LinkedIn and making any further questions. However, for now and for today, it is time to say that it's game over. Hey Engagers, thank you for listening to Professor Game Podcast. And if you want more interviews with incredible guests like Danny, then go to professorgame.com/subscribe and get started in our email list. That way, we can be in contact, and you will be the first to know of any opportunities that Professor Game might have for you. And before you go on to your next mission, would you like to know how Paul Darvasi got into games and gamification in the classroom and even into his PhD? Then subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. See you there.